This is the Soul-Filled Sisterhood podcast, and I'm your host, Nicole Burgess, a licensed marriage and family therapist and a soul-led leadership coach to women entrepreneurs. The information shared in this podcast is not a substitute, nor is it to convey professional, psychological, financial, or medical advice. If you could use such services, please seek them out from someone you trust. Now here is today's episode. Episode 134. Do you have a loud inner critic? You know, that voice inside your head that is nonstop and beats you up because you mess up or things aren't perfect or tells you not to assert yourself and ask for what you need? I know many highly sensitive professional women struggle with this, but if you head over to today's show notes, you can download your own guide in turning your inner critic into your inner guide in 4 steps. And before we dive into today's episode, I want to let you know that in March, I'm actually going to take a small break. I'm not sure if I may do 1 or 2 episodes here or there, but I've got so many things going on behind the scenes in my businesses that I need to recoup just a wee bit, and I want to stay in congruence with following my own energy as well. And it's fascinating because this is what we're going to talk about on today's episode with my upcoming guests. So enjoy today's episode, and then I will definitely be returning in April. Well, welcome, sisters. I am so excited about this upcoming conversation. My guest today is Cindy Stockdale, and I was introduced to Cindy's work by a friend and colleague, Jennifer Freeman, who you may remember. She was a previous podcast guest back on episode 56. Cindy's passion in life is to explore the great mystery and to connect deeply with others. These desires have led her to degrees in psychology and archaeology, as well as in-depth study of yoga, nutrition, and most recently, shamanism and astrology. Cindy has been teaching yoga for over 15 years and exploring shamanism for over 13. These mystery schools are essentially journeys of remembering. There is a call that is answered, and through practice and incredible truth is revealed, and ultimately the remembrance of unity, wholeness, and love. Cindy's call is to create a strong, loving space for others so that they may unveil their deepest truths and then reflect these back to them so they may rise. She loves understanding how astrology, ancestry, and the soul's purpose all interact with one another to create a stage for which this takes place, and is honored and humbled to bear witness to these inner unfoldings. Well, Cindy, thank you so much for being on today, and I'm so excited about our conversation.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me.
And before we hit record, Cindy and I were just saying, going back and forth, just like, oh, I just love how we can go deep in topics. So we're going to see what we can do today in our conversation. So be warned, we may kind of dive into these things today, ladies.
I love it.
Cindy, share with my sisters here just a little bit of what made you kind of walk the path that you're on, I call it the energy work that you do. What got you into all of this?
Such a good question. Truthfully, I've been really intuitive my entire life. And as a child, when you are extremely intuitive, you learn very quickly that it makes others uncomfortable.
Yes.
And I actually I lost friendships over this because I would be physically uncomfortable around people when something was wrong with them and they wouldn't tell me. Anyways, so fast forward to my early 20s, I started teaching yoga, and what started to happen was I would get really drained from everybody in class. And a fellow yoga teacher was teaching a medicine wheel, a shamanic medicine wheel based in the Caro, the people of the Andes Mountains in Peru. And I just read the brochure and was like, oh my gosh, something inside of me was like, you need to do this. You need to do this. So my initial intention was to figure out how to create a boundary around myself so that I wasn't constantly absorbing everybody's energy, and kind of figure out an on-off switch. And then it turned out that training was some of the greatest healing work that I had ever done in my life. And at that point, I'd done years of therapy and gone to all sorts of things. So it was so profound, the change that it made in my life. And so then I started studying it. And I think, the more I learned, the braver I got about accepting that this is just how I am in the world, and starting to become unapologetic about it and owning it, which is, stepping into my own personal power. Yeah.
Yeah. It's fascinating. So many of my previous guests, when we've talked about intuition, which I think so many people who are listening, whether they're highly sensitives or they're empathics, they do have really good intuition. And yet it's so much, at least in our culture, it's like it's dismissed or poo-pooed as we're younger and we're growing up. It's like, don't pay attention to that. Oh, you don't know what you're talking about. But it's like this visceral thing. Like you're saying, like you just got, so depleted during your yoga classes. And when you did this personal work and did this training, then you were like, I know how to manage my energy so that it's not all sucked dry by the end of the day.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think the reason this happens in childhood is because of conformity. Like we need to play according, especially children, family rules, school rules. And so we grow up in wherever we are in the world and the culture we're in, and we need to conform to that culture. And not all cultures, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, not all cultures support a child's intuitive knowing about things. And it doesn't necessarily go along with the structure. So there's this sense of like, you need to play by the rules, and them's not in the rules. So please look over here, you know?
And that becomes stifling. So as we were saying earlier before I hit record too, it's like if we're playing so much by the rules, whether it's like perfectionism or people pleasing, those kind of two known things that I call the fear-based way of being, it's like that so much of that, it to me, it eats away at your energy. It eats away at your soul's calling. It eats away at you being all of you. And when you're an adult woman, then that's where a lot of that energy drain or overwhelm comes from, because you're like, well, so-and-so wouldn't be happy if I did X, Y, and Z, and so I better not. And I'm not saying, things that are aggressive or whatever, you're like going to step all over a person's boundaries. But being able to tell yourself like, hey, I'm going to take a weekend and actually do some training over here for my own well-being and investing in yourself, right? And that's it's like when you're starting to come back into yourself, or previous guests, they've channeled as well. Right. And I know that can really freak some people out if they're able to do that. And it's like, but why? If that's their gift, let them be in that and have the tools, a way that helps them not lose themselves or all of their energy because they're trying to manage what is also going on around them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and I think that like, it's interesting you bring up channeling, because I feel like channeling is one word that we use to describe what a lot of different people are doing. It just depends on, what your philosophical principles are. Some people might call that listening to the other self. Some people might call that listening to God and prayer, but there's this we have this idea that there's this something outside of us that can give us information and direct us in this way. And it's whether or not we even are curious about that, also because like, there's this stigma where it's like, oh, I hear voices. People are like, I identify that as schizophrenia.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So it's all about what language people are bringing to the table, for example. But, when you were sharing, I was thinking about like even just the act of power of women being like, I'm tired. I'm actually going to just go lie down and have a nap. And what an act of almost disobedience that can be culturally for women, when there's so many other things to be taken care of all the time that are on women's plates. There's this kind of act of rebellion where it's like, I'm going to lie down and watch Netflix for 6 hours instead of doing laundry and cooking and cleaning and holding all these other things. It just reminds me of reclamation of power, which I think is, listening to yourself is such a reclamation of power.
And this is part of, as we do this as adult women, it's really role modeling to the younger generation of how to keep flipping this on its head so
Absolutely.
that it becomes the true norm versus an act of rebellion. Right?
Yes.
I mean, I know in my clinical work with teen girls, I'm seeing younger and younger and younger as I work a lot with the teenagers, but I'm seeing even younger that it's like, wow, this perfectionism and people pleasing is getting stronger so much earlier on for that conformity versus, hey, help me understand, what do you need and what is going on, and versus praising their kind of resourcefulness or thinking outside of the box. It's like, oh no, I'm uncomfortable, so I need to put you back in your box. And it's like, oh, I mean, then we see what happens as adult women when we're stuck in a box.
Yeah. Well, I think we see that escalate. I mean, one of my guesses would be social media, right? Like, I'm 42, so I come from the generation of the 90s, really. Like, that's when I was in high school, and the kind of media we were exposed to in terms of, like, when you're talking, I'm thinking about body issues, right? Yes. Like just another avenue by which we as a society control women and their behavior. I'm from the generation of Kate Moss and heroin chic. And so part of me is so relieved that that's not current, but there's so many other things that are current that have just morphed and are working in the same way, which is, it's striking. So I personally feel really, I think it's so important to, take a long look at how we can dismantle patriarchy. And it's hard because it's so entrenched in our culture. And it's a global issue. It's not even a cultural issue.
Yes, it is.
Global issue.
Yeah.
And, it's difficult to dismantle because it's so ingrained, but it's also crucial for the healing of boys too.
Yeah.
Men need to see women resting, men need to see women taking a break and not getting it perfect all the time. And I just think all those things are so, so important.
Part of why I'm doing this podcast, right, is trying to get women to come together and say, as we do become more unified and have these conversations, it does help them dismantle things, maybe one person at a time, but I'm a firm believer of the ripple effect. And it's being able to say, if we're taking back our power, each generation continues to take back their power too, as we do. And it's that role modeling of it. I want to kind of shift just a touch then. What are some of the areas in the work that you do as this like energy artist that you do? What are some of the areas you support women? Like, what are some of the common things that kind of are presented to you in the work that you do?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So I think it's actually along the lines of what we've been talking about. And, trauma is a big one, right? And trauma presents itself many different ways and is defined by the person. So sometimes this is, childhood trauma, like the stories that we're given as children about who we are and what we're supposed to be, and trying to figure out how to disentangle ourselves from that. Relationships with parents, with children, with partners, and of course with women. The women I work with, we deal a lot with sexual trauma, and even whether or not this has been, like, whether or not a woman herself has been, perpetrated, or she's just carrying the wounding of women being perpetrated and women being abused. So issues with sexuality, issues with claiming power, because sexuality and power and money, they're often all related.
Yep.
And yeah. And this, anxiety and depression. So we have these, the anxiety and depression is what's sitting on top.
Yeah.
And often it is it a sense of self-betrayal. This is where we get to, right? So how we betrayed ourselves. And often it's because we aren't living the lives that we want to be living in the way we want to live them, because we are trying to, be a good girl, be a good mother, do what's expected of us. And it's not often congruent with what the soul's longing is. So there's this reclamation through the energy work. You can feel people, even just getting people into their bodies is a huge act of power for a woman.
Yeah.
Can you feel your feet? Can you feel your pelvis? Can you put your hands on your own belly and embrace whatever shape, size, stretch marks, C-section scars, whatever. I mean, it's like such an act of power to just, even as a woman, be self-loving of the body.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are lots of things and there's kind of like, I'm sure this is true in therapy too, right? You could boil everything down into, we're dealing with worthiness, self-love, am I enough? These kind of core woundings, power differentials. And then, so someone will come and they'll be like, I can't sleep. So that's kind of the issue that's cloaking all this stuff underneath. Yeah.
It's a very good word, cloaking, because it is.
Yeah.
I call those like the surface level things, and I like that
Right.
word, cloaking. But it's like, this is what's going on, and as we start to go underneath it, it's like there's usually the worthiness and self-love, and that actually is a universal issue, right? Quote,
Right.
issue. It's not just
Absolutely.
in our culture, in our country, it's everywhere. And it's fascinating that when we allow ourselves to pause, and I love to tell my clients, let's get out of your head and into your body, like what you're saying. It's all of a sudden, it's like there's so much information that comes from the body. If we give ourselves permission to honor it, to acknowledge it. Yeah. And go ahead.
I was just going to say, the thing that is so profound there too is that, and this goes back to kind of what we were talking about earlier with childhood, is that, children are so in their bodies.
Yes.
And then there's this kind of training of building mistrust with the body because it's got to look a certain way or be a certain shape, or, even like being in school. I mean, it's better than it was when I was a child, but like you had to wait to go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
So all this, so part of the work that I do is also like, let's listen to the body and then let's respond. If the body tells you to do something, do it.
Yeah.
Don't just be like, thank you for that feeling. And then betray yourself by segueing into something else. Yeah. So, a really powerful way to start to practice this is with food. Like walk into your kitchen and be like, what do I want to eat? And your body will tell you right away. And I promise you, it's not sugar all the time. It really isn't. That's the fear. I'm going to get out of control with food, and then I'm going to go eat all the things, and then I'll be a bad person, which is totally inaccurate. So, walk in the kitchen, and if your body's like, hey, let's have some soup. And then you're like, okay, cool. Let's have some soup. So it's that, ask the question, hear the answer, and then respond. And then you build trust with the body. Yeah. It's so beautiful to come back into relationship with your body that way, so great.
And I know you started, so yes, to what you're talking about there. And I know I've been practicing that more. And I'm like, oh, I've got some veggies in there. Those sound good. And, there are some sugary things I have, but the vegetables really did. They were like calling my name. I'm like, we're going to go for that right now. Yeah. But I want to back up for a second. You talked about how it used to be in school where you really had to wait to use the restrooms. Yeah. And I cannot tell you how many women over the years that I've talked to that are like, oh my gosh, I can't remember the last time I did go to the bathroom, and they've been at work or in their business. And it's like they've totally ignored their body. They're like, I've got to put everybody else first. And so then that's
Yeah.
where, different infections can happen because we're totally telling our body, I don't have time for you. And then
Yeah.
different issues begin to arise because we're neglecting ourselves.
Yeah.
It's like, or
Yeah.
I don't want to drink any water, which again is cleansing up the body and we need the hydration often. And yet it's like, well, I don't do that because I don't have to go to the restroom more. It's like, yes, but it also clears out the toxins in your body. And if your body
Right.
is needing it, drink water.
Right. Yeah. And I just, yeah, women are just so trained to, you know, gotta do everything all the time, hold it
Yeah.
all together. And I mean, yeah. And then you're talking about that dichotomy of like whether or not to be, I'm going to use the term housewife, but like someone who decides to not work and just raise kids. And then there's women who work and raise kids. And then there's women who choose not to have kids. And everybody's got an opinion about
Right.
what women should or should not be doing, you know. But I do know that like women who, women who are working out of the house and in the house with children are responsible for all these hidden tasks, like doctor's appointments. And there's a whole bunch of mental space that's taken up that men don't necessarily they're not trained to even be holding that. So women's stress levels are so much higher, and I'm sure that's, yeah, everybody's got an opinion about what women should be doing.
Right. And to go back to what we're saying is when you're tapping into your own intuition, when you're tapping into your own inner knowing, it's okay to ask for that help. It's okay to say, hey, we're in this together, that I'm not the only one responsible for making those doctor's appointments or calling on this school or following up with X, Y, and Z. It's like, this is a team, effort to do these things. And it starts to shift that pattern. It shifts the flow so that again, even your children are seeing a difference and like their parents are working together.
Yes.
So
and it's an act of courage.
Yes.
To get uncomfortable and ask for help. But it's so profound. And I mean, on the energetic level, on the body level, I mean, imagine how supported your body feels if you're like, I just need to sit and put my feet up, or hey, or get resourced, like, how are you resourcing yourself even?
Right.
Yeah.
And that's part of like, for the ladies who are listening, who are, whether it's coaches, healers, whatever your employment is or your job is, meaning your company is, it's so easy sometimes, I think, and I've talked to you about this in my sessions with you, but it's like I can do that for others, but I struggle sometimes with myself. And I think that's the beauty of having someone like you, because I know there was a different guest we were talking, and she labeled it as, or she made the comment, she's like, I heard this concept, like if I'm inside the bottle, I can't read the label on the outside. And it's like, oh, so true, that. Right? It's like I hold that space for others where I can reflect back, and that's what you've done with me as well, as holding that space. And it's all these small little stuffs that we're talking about to really tap into your own intuition and what your body is needing, what your energy level is needing, and it's setting up those boundaries, asking for the help, or doing nothing, whatever that may be, but following through with that. So like you were saying, trusting yourself more versus I've got to find the answer all the time outside of me. It's like that pause and reflect and listen to what's going on inside.
Yeah. And I love so much what you're saying, because one of the things that I feel is so important to stress, at least how I personally work with people, is sure, I have training, I've done all this stuff, absolutely accurate. But I also deeply believe that people know. Yeah. They know. They just don't, and sometimes like you can offer a different perspective, but I'm trying to support people. I don't have the answers. I don't want to take people's power from them. I don't have the answers. What I'm doing is I have an experience. I have a lived experience. I have my own practice. And then, so I create this container, and I might, ask you certain questions, have some ideas about how you can get the answers. But the idea is to support someone so that they can come to their own revelation. Because like your spirit, soul, higher self, supreme self, God, like whatever language works for you, it's just cloaked again, layered upon layered of all this lifetime of narrative that says, no, you actually don't know.
Yeah.
You know. And when you're on target, you can feel it in your body.
Yes. But again, having the connection with your body is huge.
Absolutely.
So you can truly discern that feeling. Yes. Because I'll talk so much about, are you fear driven or soul led? And for me, that fear driven so much is you're up in your head all the time. That's where we talk so much about our narratives and, oh, I've got to do this. Otherwise, so-and-so is not going to like me again. Perfectionism, people pleasing, imposter syndrome, whatever label you want to smack onto it. Yeah. But it's like if you're way up there all the time and not touching into what your body's saying, it's like, is it getting tight somewhere? Is it really released? Does it feel all flowy and easy? That helps guide your decisions and the choices that you're making in life when you slow it down and reconnect with you.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I feel like, what you're sharing, we could call is anxiety, right? Like fear-driven behavior is anxious behavior. And, in my opinion, the core of that behavior is if I don't do X, I'm not going to be loved.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, I just constantly, you're just working so hard not to get disconnected because we're all driven for connection. And so, but one of the ways that, we can start to cultivate that is how do you connect to yourself and how do you love yourself? And when you, build a relationship with yourself of worthiness, then making sure everybody likes you isn't as important because you just accept that you're like, hey, I got my people. I got some people that like me. I got some people that I don't resonate with. And that's okay. Not everybody has to like me. It actually doesn't change my value as a human being on the planet.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what we were talking about earlier on. When you feel enough and love yourself, that again, it's not this selfish love like, hey, I'm the best there is on the, the planet. It's more of just, I like me and I'm happy with me. And you really do then become detached from the, expectations of others are going to change or they're going to be somebody different. It's just like, no, because I'm not here to change them. If they want to change, they'll change. I can make requests for things that I may want or need, but they're still going to do whatever they're going to do. I can't make them do anything differently, but it informs me, their responses to things inform me, and then I'll make a decision based upon that. But when I like me, like you're saying, it's like, you're not seeking so much outside of yourself to say, oh, I've got to have this in order to be enough. It's like, I already am enough.
Oh yeah. Well, and also I just, when you're talking, I'm thinking about the amount of mental energy that goes into, is this enough? Am I doing enough? Is this person mad at me? Like, like the thinking and the exhaustion. And I always give this example. So I used to be, really anxious and super type A, like so type A that I had a clothes peg for my toothpaste because my partner kept squeezing it in the middle of the tube and it drove me insane. So then I would I don't know how you could get more perfectionist than that. Just crazy. But so it was through this work with shamanism and stuff where the shamanism and the yoga and the energy work where all of that just kind of loosened and the control loosened. And now I am like, I can honestly say that in my life, I just fully accept, like, there are people who I don't resonate with and they don't resonate with me. And it's like, okay, there's 7 billion people on the planet. They don't actually all need to be in my, my people. That's okay. I could manage, and then you think about like, even how many people you can manage in a like to have on your web.
Yeah.
Most people max out at like 10 beyond their
that
family.
would be mine. Yeah.
Right. So then you're like, why is everybody gotta like you? You can only have 10 people on your web anyways, you know? But yeah, just the freedom that comes in being comfortable with yourself and is incredible.
It really is. And, I think part of what you do, and so many of my guests too that I have on, like, in their different aspects of work that they've done. But for me, what you do is it's this place I can go to invest in myself, whether it's personal development, it's a deeper spiritual, journey. It's personal care. It's that self-care to me. And I know for some people, again, we use self-care so often. People are like, it's bubble baths. I'm like, hey, if you want to do bubble baths, sometimes I like those things. But for the most part, my self-care is doing stuff like that where I'm investing in myself because it keeps me returning more to me. It keeps me going even deeper into what I am here to do. And so I'm curious, Cindy, from your perspective, however you're defining it, how is it the work, if they work with you, how can women, I guess, kind of improve their professional life? Again, I've got a lot of entrepreneurs that listen to this. Or what are ways that it can improve, like, their personal life? Give some examples of what it can do.
Well, so some of the when we're talking about professional life and business specifically, I think that one of the things that comes to mind is women undervaluing the work they do. So being willing to ask for the money that they're worth or charge the money that they're worth. And again, like, this goes back to worthiness, right? So tapping into that worthiness. And then also claiming power is a big thing for women. We live in a patriarchal society. And so how do you work in your professional life and, take the seat of the professional and hold your personal power and have, strong boundaries, especially if you're working with lots of different people, being willing to speak up and say what you mean and mean what you say. And then for people who are, solopreneurs or entrepreneurs, also the, working with manifesting ideal clients. There's a lot of women who, this happens to lots of people, but there's, culturally a mindset of scarcity.
Yes.
So, and then it's like, well, I got to work with, these 6 people I don't really like, because if I let them go, then it's a loss of this amount of revenue. And I'm kind of like, those people are just clogging your river. You need to move those 6 stones out of your river so that the abundance can flow more freely, like stepping out of the fear. Again, this is about fear of acceptance, fear about being enough, fear about worthiness. And like we said earlier, these, it's not just you or me, it's everybody's got that percolating. Everybody's got that under the surface. And so, how do you even cultivate taking small steps? And often, I know this is true in my own life and true of my clients, like, there can be something that you're so terrified to do. So something really simple is like raise your rates. I'm going to raise my rates and half my clientele is going to leave, but I am fatigued because I'm energetically out of alignment with the amount of money I'm getting. And so it's like, working on how can you even raise your rates enough where you're just at that edge of discomfort where you're like, oh, okay, this feels a bit scary, which usually tells you that you're on track. You like pushed your limit a little bit. That's what growth is. It's like, it's like a little bit edgy here. and then you accept that some people might fall away, but some people might be like so grateful to pay you that. I know women that have gone to doing sliding scales for work and get paid more. So this kind of concept of not undervaluing yourself in your professional life. And then for women that are working in places that are male dominated, I think boundary work is really great. And, we were talking earlier about patriarchy a little bit. I'm also delighted that these workspaces are changing and becoming safer for women, and I think, it'll be interesting to see what happens in the post-COVID pandemic situation, where we've unfortunately had so many women leave the workforce, but then are going to be re-entering.
Yep.
And what does that look like? And so, I think women need to think about, how do I re-enter and really honor myself and do ask for what I'm worth and don't settle.
Yeah.
Because then you're in that self-betrayal, and that's when the anxiety and depression starts.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much that I've, worked with clients over the years regarding if they're going to go outside to a company. I'm like, make sure you negotiate. And that's not something most women will do. Guys are notorious for negotiating, women will not. And so we do a lot of role playing of what that would look like. And then as the entrepreneurs that I work with, very similar. It's like really working on that belief system regarding money. And I'm like, your self-worth does not equate to your bank account. That self-worth is what you believe about yourself. It's
right.
Your bank account is like, does that support you? And like you're saying too, the energy level. It's like my fees are higher because it's like I cannot take on a ton of people because it's like been there, done that. And I just am no longer willing to sacrifice my well-being for that anymore.
Right.
And so there's so much about when we invest in ourselves, like what we're talking about, like investing in you or investing in, the work that I do, those things this is me stepping more into myself and stepping up. Like I call it like leveling up over and over and over.
Yeah.
And I think so many of my guests, they talk about having, whether it's their own therapist, their own coach, their own energy worker, whatever they need, that's it. It's like we are never, I don't believe, ever done. And it's that constant evolution. And so that's the beauty of having people you resonate with and you invest in them because you're investing in yourself, which then, again, there's the ripple effect because you're showing up more clearly for those that you work with as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Everybody needs a support team.
Yeah.
Everybody. And, this can be as small as I have a babysitter for my two kids so that I, get a break during the day, or I have someone who comes and cleans, or I have a therapist, massage, or, and you spoke to self-investment by going to see, energy work or therapy or whatever. And I think it's really crucial because we think of service and servitude and how women are entrenched in this system of service. But nothing is truly energetic service unless you're giving from a place where your cup is running over.
Yes.
The cup has to be running over. It can't be half empty. That's not energetically clean, where you're giving from a place of depletion.
Right.
You have to give from a place of abundance. So how do you keep your cup full? I mean, even walking in nature.
Oh, yes.
It's the best, right?
Yeah.
And if you live in the city, like even just go sit in a park, breathing, all that sort of stuff is so replenishing for the spirit. Yeah. And it's necessary. And, like you say, I just love that you were talking about we're constantly evolving. One of the things that I do see in my work, and I'm sure you see in yours, is people are like, God, I've been dealing with this issue forever.
Yeah.
Why am I still talking about this? But the thing I love is I remind people of the spiral. I'm like, you're not the same person coming back to this issue again a year later. You've evolved and you've changed. And so you've like peeled back the layer of the onion, and now you can see from a different perspective, and you're ready for another level or layer of healing.
So true. So true.
Yeah.
But as we said too, it's like that narrative comes up. It's like, there must be, quote, something wrong with me. And it's like, no, honey. This is you evolved, and you're at a whole different level of exploring this thing now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're all in the same boat.
Yeah.
These woundings, these like 6 core wounds, worthiness, love, etc., that we mentioned earlier, everybody has them. I mean, in energy, like in mystery schools, energy work, this is ultimately the wound of separateness. Yeah. Right. It's ultimately the wound of I'm separated from God, or we're in separate bodies.
Yeah.
And it's the wound of separation. We just want to be loved and in connection with others. And so, I mean, that then you get philosophical about dualism versus non-dualism and et cetera. But it's this wound of separation. It really is the crux, the hard point. So how do we cultivate connection? That's what we're here to do.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Yeah.
And so much of what we're talking about today is start with self. Start with that true connection to self, and going inward and really paying attention to your body and what is coming up for you in those moments. And that's so much
Absolutely.
of it. Well, Cindy, I know I could literally continue and have conversations and we can go all over the place for hours, but I'm also just paying attention to our time. And I'm curious, I want to shift just a second here. Share with my listeners, like, what are some of your own self-care practices? Because again, you do this energy work, light work, and everything as well as yoga and all of that. So what are some of your self-care practices that you do, whether it's daily or weekly, that help you stay grounded in your body?
Oh, yeah. Well, outside is a big resource. Going outside into nature is a big resource. Walking is a big resource. And then I do have people I see. I still see my teacher all the time for shamanic and expressive arts therapy. And I still have energy work done. I take naps. As an act of reclamation of power. I take naps. But I think it's really, it's so important to look outside yourself, because like massage, for example, getting body work done, or energy work or therapy, all those things are really good. And then also to start to resource yourself is also important, because then again, you're going back to building this relationship with yourself that you're like, I got this handled. Yeah. So you feel yourself, you've been working all day and you feel yourself kind of short circuiting. You're like, just get outside, go for a walk for 20 minutes, or sit down and eat a proper lunch while you're not looking at a screen of any kind.
Yes.
And then circle back. And that, that's self-care.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, love it. Love it. Well, ladies, if you want to find out more about Cindy, her website is Cindy with a Y, and then there's an E, Stockdale.com. And don't worry, I'll have it on the show notes so you can click on her link that will be there. She's also on Instagram. She's on Facebook. And again, I will have her social media links on the show notes. She does have this beautiful offer that, Cindy, I would love for you to share. What is it that you said you would give for the first 5 people?
The first 5 people who contact me can have an hour session. I just love connecting with others. And so any way I can help would be wonderful.
That is so generous. So ladies, if you go out to the show notes, then you'll see Cindy's link and you can send her an email. I would encourage you to say, I heard you on the Soulfilled Sisterhood podcast, so she knows, and then go ahead and connect with her. So it's the first 5 of you who contact her. Well, Cindy, I just want to say thank you so much for being on today. Thank you for doing what you're doing. Thank you for following your soul's passion so that, you help others around the globe as well with helping them continue to follow theirs. Thank you.
And thank you so much for having me. It was such a delight to get to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. And remember, if you have a loud inner critic, one that tells you you're not enough or you can't do something, head over to NicoleBurgessCoaching.com and download your Turn Your Inner Critic into Your Inner Guide in 4 steps.